At a lavish Atlas Dynamics gala at the Plaza Hotel, everyone laughed at Daniel Brooks, a husband widely seen as unemployed and living off his wife. But no one could have imagined that with just a single sentence from him, the company's most powerful leadership would collapse within 24 hours. Daniel Brooks lived with his wife in a luxurious penthouse in Manhattan, yet from the outside, no one would think he held any significant position. Every morning, Sophia Bennett left the apartment dressed in expensive tailored suits, stepping into a company car that took her to Atlas Dynamics headquarters in the heart of New York City. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed behind in a simple sweater, making coffee, reading financial news, and walking their small dog around the Upper East Side. In the eyes of Sophia's friends, Daniel was nothing more than the unemployed husband living off his wife. At corporate parties and business dinners, he would quietly stand behind Sophia, more like a plus one than an equal partner. People often asked him seemingly polite but subtly condescending questions like, "So what have you been up to lately?" Or, "Early retirement must be nice, huh?" Daniel would simply smile and let it pass. For years, he had grown accustomed to being underestimated. He heard the whispers behind his back, noticed the sympathetic glances from Sophia's colleagues, yet he never once tried to explain himself. To Sophia, he was always the one standing behind her, supporting her career, cooking dinner every night, fixing things around the house, and listening to her vent about work late into the night. But deep down, Daniel had begun to feel as though he was slowly becoming invisible within his own marriage. The annual Atlas Dynamics Gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, a place where simply stepping into the lobby was enough to make you feel the presence of money and power. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over tailored suits, champagne flutes, and watches worth as much as a small apartment in Brooklyn. Sophia Bennett arrived like the company's true star. Her emerald silk dress hugged her flawless figure, making her stand out effortlessly in the crowd. Executives kept stopping to greet her, while Daniel quietly followed behind, a glass of whiskey in hand. He was used to it. When Sophia pulled him over to a table of senior leadership, Daniel immediately noticed Ryan Carter standing there. Ryan was the classic Wall Street type. Slicked back hair, an overly confident smile, and a constant need to be the center of attention. Ryan threw an arm around Daniel as if they were old friends. "Daniel, man, I've always wanted to ask you something." He laughed loudly. "What's it like living off your wife?" The whole table burst into laughter. Daniel stayed calm, taking a small sip of his whiskey. Ryan went on, this time raising his voice so nearby tables could hear. "I mean, Sophia's skyrocketing at Atlas Dynamics, and what about you? Sitting at home watching Netflix, playing golf, ordering stuff on Amazon all day." Laughter erupted again. A few people glanced at Daniel with a mix of pity and amusement, like they were watching free entertainment. Then Ryan delivered the line that got the biggest reaction. "Honestly, man, being a loser supported by your wife, I guess that takes some kind of talent, right?" For a moment, it felt like the entire room slowed down, but the most painful moment wasn't Ryan's insult. It was when Daniel turned to look at Sophia and saw that she was laughing too. Not an awkward, forced smile, but a real laugh. Daniel stood there in silence, his eyes slowly scanning each face around the table, and for the first time in years, a chilling feeling began to rise inside him. Daniel Brooks sat silently as laughter echoed across the VIP table at the Plaza Hotel. The whiskey in his hand remained untouched, but his eyes had completely changed. Ryan Carter leaned back in his chair, laughing loudly as if he owned the entire room. "Come on, Daniel," he said mockingly. "At least you should be thanking Sophia. Not every man is lucky enough to be supported by his wife." The group of executives burst into laughter. A few even clinked their glasses in agreement. Sophia covered her mouth lightly as she laughed along, her golden hair shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. Maybe to her, it was just a social moment, a way to fit in with her colleagues. But to Daniel, it felt like the final blade, cutting through the last of the patience he had held on to for years. He gently set his glass down on the table. No sound. Richard froze. Yet that small action was enough to make Ryan's laughter begin to fade. Daniel slowly stood up. His tall frame instantly created an unspoken tension within the elegance of the ballroom. He adjusted the silver watch on his wrist, then looked straight at CEO Richard Hayes, who was standing nearby. "Richard," Daniel said, his voice calm to the point of being unsettling, "I think it's time you told the truth." "Daniel," Richard stammered. Ryan frowned, confused. "What truth?" Daniel turned to look at him. "The truth that the man you just called a loser," he paused for a few seconds, "is the one who actually owns the majority of this company." The smile vanished from Ryan's face. The entire table fell silent. Sophia blinked repeatedly, unable to process what was happening. Daniel continued, "I own 90% of Atlas Dynamics." A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand behind them, shattering loudly against the floor in the sudden silence. Richard Hayes lowered his head, offering no denial, and that alone was enough for everyone to know Daniel was telling the truth. Ryan took a step back, his face turning pale. "Wait, what?" Sophia stared at her husband, panic filling her eyes. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" But Daniel didn't answer her right away. He simply looked slowly around the room, the same room that had been filled with mocking laughter just minutes before. Now, every single person who had looked down on Daniel Brooks stood in complete silence. Because they had just realized a terrifying truth. The man they thought was the most useless person in the room was actually the most powerful. After the shock at the gala at the Plaza Hotel, all of Atlas Dynamics was buzzing with one name, Daniel Brooks. No one could understand how a man who had been seen as living off his wife could make CEO Richard Hayes turn pale with just a few words. But the truth was, Daniel had never been an ordinary man. 15 years earlier, when the tech boom was sweeping across the United States, Daniel was the founder of Orion Systems, a software startup that grew so rapidly it was constantly being pursued by investors in both New York and California. While others were still struggling to secure funding, Daniel had already built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars before the age of 30. At that same time, Atlas Dynamics was on the brink of collapse. The company was drowning in financial crisis, its stock price plummeting as banks began pulling their support. Richard Hayes was nearly desperate. He came to Daniel with one final proposal: merge Orion Systems to save Atlas Dynamics from bankruptcy. Daniel agreed, but instead of stepping into the spotlight as a high-profile tech billionaire, he chose to disappear from public view. Daniel retained full ownership through an anonymous investment fund, allowing Richard to continue running the company as its public-facing leader. No one knew that the real power behind the company was Daniel Brooks. For 15 years, he lived quietly, avoiding media attention and extravagant parties. He let people believe he had retired early, lived off investments, or simply was no longer successful. The reason was simple. Daniel wanted to be seen as an ordinary person. When he met Sophia Bennett, he believed she loved him for who he truly was, not for the money, power, or status he could have easily displayed to the world. So he chose to stay silent, until that very silence led everyone to see him as a nobody. Daniel Brooks walked out of the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel without looking back. Behind him, the entire room was still in chaos after a shocking turn of events no one had seen coming. Voices overlapped in hushed panic, phones rang nonstop, and the pale, shaken face of Richard Hayes lingered in the minds of everyone who had been there that night. But Daniel didn't care anymore. He moved quickly through the hotel lobby, loosening his tie as if trying to escape the suffocating atmosphere he had just left behind. "Daniel, wait!" Sophia's voice called out from behind him. The sharp rhythm of her heels echoed across the marble floor as she rushed after him, her face filled with a kind of panic he had never seen before. When she grabbed his arm, Daniel finally stopped. "What did you just say back there?" Sophia asked, breathless. "Do you really own Atlas Dynamics?" Daniel looked at her for a few seconds. For the first time in years, he looked at the woman he loved with exhaustion instead of warmth. "You really didn't know?" he asked quietly. Sophia shook her head over and over. The confident expression of a successful Manhattan executive began to fade from her face. "I thought you just retired early. I thought you were living off investments." Daniel let out a faint, bitter laugh. "That's what you believed for the past 15 years? Sophia stood there, frozen. In her mind, hundreds of small memories began piecing themselves together. The phone calls Daniel always stepped outside to take, The financial documents he kept locked in his office, the way banks had always treated him with a strange level of respect she had never questioned. Then Daniel said something that left her almost speechless. "What hurt me wasn't Ryan insulting me." He looked directly into her eyes. "It was you laughing along with them." Sophia immediately broke down in tears. "Daniel, I didn't mean to." "But you still did." He cut in, his voice calm in a way that made it even more painful. "After all these years we've been together, you still let other people convince you that your own husband was a failure." Sophia didn't know how to respond, because for the first time she realized a terrifying truth. She had lived with Daniel for 15 years, but had never truly understood who he really was. The next morning, Atlas Dynamics headquarters in Midtown Manhattan no longer felt like an ordinary tech company. A tense atmosphere hung over every floor of the sleek glass offices. Employees gathered in small groups around the coffee machines, constantly whispering about what had happened the night before at the Plaza Hotel. And at exactly 8 a.m., Daniel Brooks arrived. No longer the quiet husband standing behind Sophia. This time, he entered the building through the executive entrance reserved for the board of directors. His perfectly tailored navy suit, combined with his calm, cold gaze, was enough to silence the entire reception area. Within just a few hours, Daniel had signed off on a series of internal audit orders. Every financial record at Atlas Dynamics was reviewed from the ground up. Executive spending, partner contracts, bonus structures, everything. Daniel didn't shout or slam tables like old-school bosses. What unsettled people more was his silence. He simply sat in the 42nd floor conference room, flipping through financial reports with an almost expressionless face. But the deeper the investigation went, the uglier the truth became. Several senior executives had been using company funds for personal vacations in Aspen and Miami. Multi-million-dollar contracts had been funneled to relatives and friends. Some projects had been approved not for their merit, but because of hidden internal connections. And the name that appeared most frequently in the questionable reports was Ryan Carter. Daniel discovered that Ryan had quietly been prioritizing contracts for his cousin's construction company for years. Not entirely illegal, but enough to enrage the board. By that afternoon, Ryan was called into HR. He walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box under the watchful eyes of hundreds of curious employees. The man who had mocked Daniel in front of everyone just hours earlier had now become the biggest topic of conversation in the office. But that was only the beginning. 2 days later, the board of directors held an emergency meeting. Richard Hayes tried to maintain his composure, but it was too late. Evidence of poor leadership, lack of financial transparency, and a culture of favoritism under his tenure had piled up across the conference table. The vote took less than 10 minutes. Richard Hayes was forced to resign that very day, and for the first time in years, Atlas Dynamics finally knew who was truly in charge. After Richard Hayes quietly exited Atlas Dynamics, the entire company entered a period of instability. Employees worried about their future. Shareholders were uneasy. The media began chasing the story of the mysterious owner who had suddenly emerged and reshaped the entire leadership team in just a matter of days. But Daniel Brooks didn't step in to tear Atlas Dynamics down. He came to save it, again. In the first board meeting following the upheaval, Daniel made a decision that surprised many. He appointed Samantha Brooks as the new CEO. Samantha wasn't the flashy, headline-grabbing type of leader you'd expect in Manhattan. She didn't appear in business magazines or attend lavish parties in the Hamptons. She was someone who had spent more than a decade quietly working in the engineering department, leading successful projects while others were busy playing internal politics. And Daniel saw that. Atlas Dynamics doesn't need another person who knows how to perform for the cameras, he said during the meeting. It needs someone who actually knows how to run it. Under Samantha's leadership, things began to change quickly. Underperforming managers were replaced by people with real capability. Long, pointless meetings were cut. Office politics gradually disappeared. For the first time in years, employees felt like their voices were being heard. Engineers were rewarded based on actual performance. Hardworking individuals started getting promoted instead of those who were simply good at pleasing their superiors. The entire atmosphere of the company shifted. And what surprised many the most was that Daniel didn't behave like a power-hungry owner. He rarely appeared in the media, didn't boast about his victories, and showed no interest in humiliating those who had once looked down on him. Because to Daniel, true victory wasn't about getting revenge on the people who underestimated him. It was about transforming a place once filled with corruption and pretense into a company people could genuinely be proud to work for. 3 months after the upheaval that shook Atlas Dynamics, Daniel Brooks once again stepped into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Everything looked the same as it had that night. The massive crystal chandeliers, soft jazz music drifting through the luxurious space, expensive suits and champagne glasses shimmering under the warm golden light. But one thing had completely changed. This time, the moment Daniel appeared at the ballroom entrance, the entire room rose to its feet. Applause echoed throughout the hall. There were no more dismissive glances, no more mocking laughter behind his back. The employees of Atlas Dynamics looked at Daniel with genuine respect, not just because he was the owner, but because of everything he had done for the company over the past few months. Under Samantha Brooks' leadership, with Daniel's support behind the scenes, Atlas Dynamics had begun to make a powerful comeback. The workplace had become more fair. Talented employees were finally given the chance to shine. Profits were rising again, but more importantly, people felt proud to work there. Daniel slowly walked across the same room that had once made him feel small. Now, that very place offered him a level of respect he had never asked for. As he stepped onto the stage, his eyes briefly landed on Sophia Bennett sitting below. Sophia no longer carried the same cold confidence she once had. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with emotions that were hard to name: regret, remorse, and a kind of respect she had realized far too late. Their marriage hadn't returned to what it once was. Some wounds don't disappear after a few apologies. But at least now, Sophia had finally seen who Daniel Brooks truly was. Not the unemployed husband, not a shadow standing behind her, but the man who had quietly carried the weight of the world on his shoulders for years. Daniel stood at the microphone, looked out across the room, and gave a faint smile. His voice was low and steady. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. In the end, Daniel Brooks' story isn't just about money, power, or a dramatic reversal that left an entire company stunned. What people remember most is how a man who stayed silent for years chose to preserve his dignity instead of showing off to the world. So many people judge others by the car they drive, the job they have, or how they present themselves in public. But life is full of people like Daniel. The stronger they are, the more quietly they live, because those who truly have value don't need to prove it every single day. The story also reveals a hard truth about marriage. Sometimes respect matters even more than love. Daniel could endure the ridicule of outsiders, but what hurt him the most was the moment the woman he loved chose to laugh along with the crowd instead of standing by his side. And sometimes the things people say just for fun can be the fastest way to destroy a relationship. After everything, Daniel didn't choose revenge through destruction. He didn't use his power to make others afraid. Instead, he rebuilt Atlas Dynamics into something better, more fair, and more worthy of pride. Because true strength isn't about proving how powerful you are. It's about how you use that power to create positive change once it's finally in your hands. And perhaps the biggest lesson from this story is this: never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most powerful.